Hello, everyone, and great to see you all joining in to another exciting Oxygen XML live experience. My name is Alim Belu, and as usual, I will be your host for today's live event. The event being the third installment of the Transforming XML and HTML documents to PDF using CSS tutorial series, and this one will be called Global Page Layout. Your journey into defining the look and format of your documents with the use of CSS continues with another extensive tutorial held by the returning Julian Lecor, software developer at Syncrosoft, the company that produces the Oxygen suite of products. And this time, this event will be dedicated to the global page layout. And during this event, you will learn how to create and control PDF pages directly from CSS. So get ready because a lot of topics will be covered today. Now, in just a little bit, Julian will start his presentation, but before, let me give you some useful information about today's webinar as always. All of our events are being recorded, so today's event makes no difference. After the webinar comes to an end, the recording will be made available on the event page on our site, oxygenxml.com, along with the slides and samples of Julian's presentation. And also, the recording will be uploaded on our YouTube channel titled Oxygen XML. Another important aspect is that as we go along, we encourage you to ask us questions by using the questions panel from the GoToWebinar interface, where Dan Capriora, Senior Software Developer, will assist us by answering your questions in real time. And with this, I end my introduction speech and welcome to the stage, Julian Lecor. Hi, Julian.
Hello, Aline. Hello, everyone. Let's start the new journey with the new webinar Transforming XML and HTML documents to PDF using CSS. So as Aline says before, in this webinar, we will see how to create a layout for page medias, including, of course, PDFs, all of that using CSS style sheets. So for that, first, we need to see what is CSS for printing. So as you may get conclusion by yourself, there are some differences between a page media versus the classic web screen media. The first one is that we have a fixed page size when a browser will have a dynamic viewport which adapts automatically to the content. The second difference came from the first point. When you set a fixed page size, it implies that a collection of pages will be created, when on the other hand, on a browser, you will have a continuous display simply loaded once. Also, printing a document involves additional concepts like the bookmarks, the table of contents, the page numbering, page breaks, etc., etc. So now let's continue with a bit of theory. In order to create pages, you will need to use what is called the page CSS at rule. This rule lets you define fixed printing properties for pages like the size, the margins, and the background. You can also, using the same rule, define some headers and footers using what is called the page margin boxes. Also, together with the page rule, you will see the page selectors, which we can divide in two different types. The page selector, the named page selector, which is the name you will give to your specific pages, and of course some CSS pseudo classes to define left and right pages, first pages of a set of pages, or blank pages. Of course, note that all these pseudo classes can be mixed together, so you can have the first left, for example, or the first right. Also, as I mentioned before, you may need to add content in the margins using what is called the page margin boxes. Here you will see in the schema all the different available page margin boxes where you can set, for example, the page numbers, title, extra, etc. I also added the link to the specification of these page margin boxes as usual. So before we start, let me present you the project I created for this specific webinar. So for this webinar, instead of using some small example, I took a whole book, which is Le Tour du Monde en 80 jours by Jules Verne. Don't be scared, I just take a French book as a little reminder that I'm French too, but I will make the whole explanation in English, and the book content is not what we will focus on today. So all the text and images are taken from the site Project Gutenberg, which refers a lot of ancient and newer books. The only modification I did is that I extracted the style, the CSS, which was included in the classic HTML document provided by the Project Gutenberg file, in a separate CSS style sheet for you to be an easy reading file. So let me present. So the project I will use is in my Oxygen 23.1. So here I have the book as it is from the Project Gutenberg. I simply remove from it the style from the header and copy it in this CSS style sheet, which for us is not relevant at this point. And I imported it directly from the HTML file and added my custom CSS file for the printing, which is the following one, where I already do some small modifications. I hide some elements that are irrelevant to the print document, for example, all the pre, because they contain some specific to the web displays. And some fonts. I added some fonts from the Google fonts for having a more pleasant output document, but that's the only modification I did for the moment. I will detail the other modification further in this webinar. So before entering the practical, we will ask you the same usual question. I want to know what is your CSS level. So I will let you a few seconds to answer, because what we will see today is a little more complicated, but as you will see during the webinar, this is not as complicated as it may seem at the first sight. So I think we have quite a lot of answers. We can stop our poll for now. So most of you have basic CSS knowledge, which is great because this is exactly the scope of these webinars, to become and to go to this level to the next one, so to use some functions, etc. And for the other ones, the guru and the people, the advanced people, it will be quite a good remember to what you can do using CSS. So now let's start our book customization by first defining some pages. So as I mentioned before, I will use the page CSS rule with a combination of pseudo classes. I will, for each of them, define some page selectors. For example, I will have a cover page, a default page, etc. And I will use, for each of them, you have to know that each of the defined page must be declared into an element or a pseudo element using the page property. For example, as you may see under below, it's for my body. I will define that all what is included in my body will have the default page. Also, why do we want to define some pages? Because like this, we can set some size and margins normally, or usually it's set globally, because you want to have the whole content to be formatted on one type of page. The available page sizes that are supported by Oxygen PDF Chemistry are from the ISO 216 standard, for example, the A4 document pages, but we also support the NC standard for the American document format, for example, the US letter or the US legal. Or you can also, if you want a specific format, you can also define a mono-dimensional or a bi-dimensional document. For example, using 4" to make a 4" square, or 4 inches and 8 inches to make a rectangle. Just add a note that Oxygen PDF Chemistry use the US letter size format as its default. So if you do not define this globally, the output PDF will have the US letter size, which is 8.5 by 11 inches. And also I will define a page margin box to add my page number into my document. So let me show you how this will be done. So first, as I explained before, I will define a global page size, which for my example is 6 by 9 inches, which is a quite common book size, page size. And I will add to this 1/2 inch margin on all the top, bottom, left and right margins. Then I will define first my default page, which only have a bottom center. So it will have in my bottom center a page margin, a simple thing having a dash, the counter with the number, the page number, the current page number, and another dash. I also set the font I took from Google Fonts, and I reduce a little the font size to be a little lower than the content font size. And I will also define a cover page which will contain my cover image that is normally displayed when you read the book. The first page contains the front page of the book. So I use for this background image with the URL of the cover page, which is the image given by the Project Gutenberg. I center this image. I do not want this image to be repeated. And I also set the image to use the whole page length and width. As I mentioned also in a previous slide, for each of these cover and default page, I need to use the page property to explain at what moment, at what level I want this page to be used. So I want all my HTML body containing the whole book to be displayed using the default page, so having the counter on it. And I want the cover page to be displayed before everything in the book, so before the root HTML element. Please note that if you are using a before element to set a page, you may need to add an empty content to explain that this page, this element, the before one, have to be not empty, because it will not be generated by the processor. So now let's go back and define a few more pages. The first page I want, the more specific page I want to use is I want to use a landscape page. So I want to rotate my page. So for this, I will use another property, which is the size landscape property, which can of course be used together with, for example, the page sizes. So I can define a A4 landscape or a US letter landscape, but in my case, I don't want to change the default page size. So I just need to indicate that if an element is marked with the landscape page, it will be displayed on a landscape page and not on a portrait one. So again, back in my document, I simply copied the example I have in my slides and define on one of the figure which contains the map which is displayed inside my document, inside my book. I have a map which I want to be displayed on the landscape page, because a map usually does not render correctly on a portrait page, because it's most of the time it's larger than the page. So I want to rotate my page to be easier to see. Another problem I can find, sometimes I can want my whole content to be divided into multiple columns. I don't want a single column with all my content. So for that, as for the other pages, I define a new type of page, which I called in my example 2 columns, but you can name it, as I explained, you can give the name the perfect, the more simplest name you can use, or whatever you prefer. And I will use another CSS property, which is called the column count. And in my example, I define this value to 2, which means that one of my page, instead of being displaying into one single column, which will be divided into 2 columns. So as for the other one, I define the page at rule, adding the column count property, and adding on one or more elements the page property, saying that I will use the 2 columns pages for a specific section, which is called corrections, into my book, because I want this section to be displayed on 2 columns. I will show you the result after. Another thing you may need to do in your content is to control how the content is break between the pages. For that, CSS provide 3 dedicated properties, which are set at element level, which are the page break before, inside, and after. In my examples, I have already used and defined some of them. So for example, I want a break after the first book title, which is defined as the HTML H1 element. I don't want anything in the same page after, so I will break the page after. Another thing that I want is that before my table of content, my book table of content, I want it to start on a new page. So I will set the page break before, to be sure that the content is broke exactly before my table of content. And like this, my table of content will start on a new page. And the last example, I did the same for the titles, the 3rd level titles. I want them to be broke on a separate page. I don't want them in the middle of my content. And another thing that I set is that if I define a figure containing an image and a title, I do not want the processor to break the page inside, because if I didn't do that, you may have a situation where the image is displayed on one page and the title or the description of the image is on another page. So I like this. Using the avoid and always combinations, I can control for a specific element or set of elements the page breaks. Another thing you can do if you want to control the page breaks more globally is to define them at the page level. So this will be contained on the page rule, the at rule elements. using two dedicated properties created for these specific situations, which are the oxy initial page number and the oxy force page count. Those two properties induce the notion of odd and even pages. Like in all the books, you will find some odd pages and even pages. And those two properties controls the starting and the ending of each page block or set of pages. So the oxy initial page number will force the document to start on a specific page or odd or even, and the oxy force page count will force the page set to end on an odd or even page, or to have a specific count of pages. For example, I want my a set of page to have 2 pages or 3 pages, but I don't want it to have once 2 and once 3, so I will set that I want my page count to have 3, for example. In my example, I set for the cover page one of these rules. I said that the page count must end on an even page. This means that I cannot end my cover page on the page 3, for example. It must end on 2, 4, etc., etc. I will also show you the details on the final document. We will go on each point separately. And finally, to control page breaks, you can also use two other CSS properties, which are called orphans and widows. So these properties allows you to define for one block element the number of lines that must be shown at the bottom or the top of a page. And I did not set other values for these specific properties, but Oxygen PDF Chemistry already uses a value set on 2 for each orphans and widows property for the paragraphs, and I will show you how this looks into my document. So now that I have my whole customization made, so I set my pages, my default pages for all the pages, my cover pages. I also remind you that on my first page only, I will, or my first page of the cover, sorry, I will have the cover of the book, the front page. I set the default page for the whole book, and one landscape page and one 2 columns page. Also, don't forget to use the page property for each time you want to define. So in my example, I have 4 different named type of pages. I must find into my document 4 of these declarations. So one for the cover, one for the default page, one for the landscape, and one for the 2 columns. Here are my classic page breaks, and you will find that the cover page ends on an even page. So let's start and see how is the final result. So this is the final result of the chemistry transformation. You will have define the cover page on the first page of the cover page. If I go further into my document, I will have a blank page because my cover page must end on an even page, so nothing is defined from another page here. It's still my cover page. Then I will start to have my default page, you can recognize it by the page number I defined here. So here is exactly what you have here. And what I forgot to mention is that on the first chapter of my document, I reset the page to 1. So you will see that when I reach the first chapter, the page counter starts again to 1. And also I forgot to mention that the page counter is a default provided counter that you don't need to define elsewhere. It's already existing in all the PDF chemistry documents. So let's continue. Here we have the page 3 for all the images. And now if we start the first chapter, we are back to page 1, as I explained before. We can see some kind of page breaks. So each of the chapters starts on a new page. What I explained, that all the images cannot be separated from their titles. Another part of the control of the page break control is the widow and the orphan. I will show you some few examples. So here, for example, we have a quite nice example of a paragraphs which starts on the page 33 and going after to the 34th page. And as I mentioned, the orphans and widow controls that at least the paragraph must have 2 lines before the page breaks and 2 after the pages breaks. We have the same on this page. For example, if I took this one, you will see that there is a lot more than 2 pages here and 2 lines here, which are the minimum allowed by the processor because the set on the paragraphs are 2 and 2. I will also show you the table of contents. So as I shown you, I inserted by force a break before the table of contents. So the table of content cannot start inside another content. It starts at the beginning of the page. Here you will find the map that I told before that is now rendered into a landscape page. So this is rendered into my my PDF viewer as a landscape page as it's rotated. But if you print this page will still be in portrait because you will glue it as portrait in the book. But the map, if you want to read the map, you will have to rotate the book to see correctly how they travel all around the globe. And the last page setup I did in this part is that for the correction section, I set a 2 columns rendered. So you will see that here there is a separate thing and I cannot go as if it was a single line. It will select the whole columns because it's separated columns display, which is different that the default 1 column used in most of my content. Another thing that you may have is that for all of these rules, I attached a link to the documentation of each of them. So if something after this webinar is still quite unclear, you can reach the documentation containing the whole specification and the whole details, values, the available values, and the examples. I also add a few links to our documentation, the chemistry documentation, including a full tutorial which do quite the same example as I did on another book of the Project Gutenberg library, using quite the same principle, setting some fonts, page breaks, page sizes, etc., etc. And with this all said, I want to thank you as usual for if you have some questions and for your attendance. I hope I made the whole page system into print medias a little more easier to you. And if you have any other more questions, don't hesitate to ask.
Thank you, Julian. And a big thank you to all the people that joined us today. And yes, we have some questions from our audience members. Let's start with the first one. Can you define different margins for odd and even pages?
Yeah, of course you can. I can customize my examples. For example, if I want to define for the default page, I want a specific margin for the left and for the right page, I just need to add once again the page, saying that the default, and saying, for example, if I said right, I will talk only about the even pages. Then I just need to add the margin and saying, for example, I want the margin, the left margin, to be 1/4 of an inch. Only the even pages will have 1/4 of an inch. The other ones will refer to the default rule, which is 1/2 an inch. And if even this rule is not enough for me, I can do exactly the same for the odd pages, saying, for example, that the margin right in this case will be 1/4 of an inch. So this is the rule. You may use the right and the left pseudo classes together with the page definition. So this, the first one will mean here for all the default page. This means only the even pages, and this means only the odd pages.
Thank you, Julian. I have a slight correction to make. That was our only question. The rest
Okay.
of the chat are people thanking you and telling you
Thank you
that
too for attending.
yes, you apparently you made a great presentation, and I know questions.
I'm glad they appreciate it.
Oh, we
Uh,
have a question.
Another question in
Yeah.
direct. I also see that there is a user asking for PDF custom templates, and at the moment, the only XML vocabulary that supports the use of custom templates is the data to CSS. So in my case, as I'm using XML and HTML, I cannot create a full template. But if you are using data, you can create, there is another kind of transformation allowing you to create templates.
Also, another question
Yeah,
that just came in. How can you share the definitions with the web author CSS files?
I'm not sure. You may need to ask once again the web author team, but normally you can do this by creating on a framework, a custom Oxygen framework, and setting this transformation into the as the default transformation for the custom framework. Then after, as far as I know, you can export from Oxygen this framework and import it into Oxygen Web Author. But this may need some more detailed answer, I think. But as far as I know, you can do this by frameworks.
Okay, and don't forget that we will answer all of the questions by mail if we need
Of course.
to make additions to your answers, Julian. Also, do you want to mention the web-based styler?
I can mention it even on this part. For example, if I want to, as it's an HTML document, I already did this on other documents, on other webinars. But for all the HTML documents, of course, you can open it in the web browser or on Oxygen author mode. The only difference is that Oxygen will have to activate the print ready mode from the styles to apply also the print CSS style sheet I defined, because for not breaking any web rendering, I set the media to be print for only for my modifications. The default CSS applies on both print and web outputs. If you do this, I repeat a little more. So for Oxygen author mode, it's the print ready option from the style dropdown. And if you prefer the web browser, you just need to select this icon which toggle the print media, and as you will see that you have the differences here. So this is the web versions as it is exactly from the Project Gutenberg, and this is what I modified on my site. If you prefer Google Chrome, there is exactly the same option on all the browsers. I think even Microsoft Edge has the same option. So I must need to set, I don't remember where it is, but I'm sure that you can set the print here also. But I don't remember exactly where it is. I must use to the Firefox one, but I'm sure you can toggle one and the other. I'm not sure if you have any other questions.
As an addition to this last question, our audience member meant the what you see is what you get CSS style picker.
Oh, this I'm not sure this works for the HTML or XML empty like documents, because the framework doesn't give you a lot of these. But if I took any data example, I could do this, but I have to mention that the old what you see is what you get transformation is already deprecated and will disappear into the next Oxygen version. So you will not be able to select another style from this dropdown and having directly the output looking like what you have here, because now we are more focusing that what you want to do instead of proposing directly a full customization using these templates and these dropdowns.
Thank you, Julian. I think we went through all of our audience members' questions. Thank you all for showing your involvement by asking Julian these questions. So let me take back control.
Yeah.
Also, we will make sure that if you have any other questions after the presentation is over, you can go to our event page here, where you will have the recording of this event available along with Julian's sample files and slides on the event page. And here, as you can see, we have the feedback component where you can address all of your questions or comments regarding Julian's presentations. Now, let me get back to my slides, and let me mention our schedule for the month of April, because we have prepared for you some interesting events. As you can see, next week we will have the Working with Data in Oxygen, Customizing the Editing Experience webinar presented by Sorin Carbonaro. And this is the fourth episode of our Working with Data in Oxygen series. And we will explore several ways of customizing the data editing experience according to your desires. And this webinar will cover the customization of author actions, the author mode rendering, document validation, the content completion assistant, and new document templates. And also on the 21st of April, we will have creating frameworks using an extension script webinar that will be presented by Alex Gitiano. And starting recently, a framework can be created using special XML descriptor file, either from scratch or by extending an existing built-in framework, such as Dita or DocBook, and then making modifications to it. So during this event, we will take an extensive look at this specific method. Also, we encourage you to take a look at our events page, because there you can find the links to register to all of these events for free, and of course know everything about our future events and where the Oxygen team will be next. So, reaching the end of today's webinar, let me thank Julian again for helping us continue our journey into defining the look and format of our documents by using CSS. So thank you, Julian.
Thank you too, and thank you to all the attendees.
And also a big thank you to Dan Capriuara for helping us with the audience's questions in real time. And of course, the biggest of the thank yous is sent toward everyone for joining us again this week, as every other week where when we have an event. And until next time, stay safe and have a nice day or evening. Bye bye.